I'm the woman of the mind.
So we're gonna just take that.
Woman of the mind.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to House of Ways and Means. This is gonna be the second video in our series on U.S. generations. So who we talking about today?
Well, we're going to be talking about the baby boomers. Kind of just jump right into it. So, as you may already know, the birth years for the generation of baby boomers typically begin around 1945-46. Pretty much goes for about 20 years, actually. It ends at about 1965.
So this group came into play right after World War II. So we talked about it in the last video. You know, the U.S. In the previous generation hadn't attained the global status that it has, that we know it to have now. But after World War II, after all the conflict ended, so much industry expanded in the United States, and that's what really kind of catapulted the U.S. to the #1 spot. So, as all the troops came back home, they came back to some great policy from the government that made it easier for people who had fought in the military to, come back, get an education, get jobs, get homes, and it just really was a time of economic prosperity. Now, obviously, they dealt with some, economic issues as everyone else does, but I would say for the most part, the time period ensuing that baby boomers came up in was marked by a lot of economic growth for the U.S., some really prosperous times. And so, they were able to have good careers and have some good money. So tell us a little bit what you found about what the main differences were between the baby boomers and the previous generation.
So I would say one of the main differences is the attitude in regards to comfort level. In the previous generations where we spoke about the traditionalists, they were very nervous about where their next meal was going to come from, or the positions that they had, and kind of trying to make things last.
A lot of governmental conflict, war that was possibly coming.
Exactly. So there was an issue of safety and concern there. But once World War II was ended, U.S. gained a lot of political power. Suddenly the people, overall, they had a sense of peace. They felt comfortable, they felt secure, and so they became an encouraged people, and that catapulted their response to education. Seeking more education, like you said. They were very supportive of one another. So what I found too, that as one of the huge differences between these generations, is that the baby boomers almost became a little bit narcissistic in their need for expanding themselves, as opposed to other generations that were very more family oriented. I would say that's one of the main differences between these generations.
Yeah, we talked a lot about how the previous generation was all about authority, all about the government leading them to the promised land. Whatever the government wanted to do, we were going to toe the company line. Look, the baby boomers, that wasn't them. If something didn't make sense to them, if they didn't agree with something, they let them know. They weren't afraid of that conflict. So you hear a lot of stories about the wars that were going on in between the 50s and the 70s, and how they fought against it. They were really anti-war. They grew up in a time where civil rights movement was really burning pretty hot, and so they came to have a more liberal viewpoint. They were more into equality for all people. They were known as workaholics. They were all about getting their money. The more you work, the more you got. And so with that, they worked hard, but they also played hard. Nobody parties like a baby boomer, all right? You know, the booze, the drugs, just the running around, having a good time, spending the money you're making. Now, unfortunately, you know, baby boomers, they haven't been able to retire like at the traditional retirement ages. A lot of them are still working. You know, they made that money, and for all the economic peace and prosperity that they were able to experience over the course of their careers, they didn't save up quite enough. So now a lot of them are still stuck working past the age that they probably wanted to because they haven't saved up enough. But they were quick to always have to keep up with the Joneses. That's kind of like the environment that they came up in and they worked their careers through. So, you know, they had to have the big cars, the big toys, the sound systems, the big screen TVs. And they were the first ones to really do it big with all of that stuff. So, I mean, you know, it is what it is, no judgment. You know, money is what it is. You know, it's not the end of the world if you don't have quite enough and you have to work, you know. I mean, you know, at least they've really relished and created kind of the system that we have now. We're a powerful country, a safe country. And so they kind of brought forward all the work that the traditionalists did. And, you know, they kind of have us sitting where we are now. And, you know, they're still in the workforce, but they're, you know, trying to hand it off to the next generations. But, you know,
But let me ask you this. I just wanted to interrupt you for a second here. How do you think those thoughts and those feelings affected their thoughts about investments?
Well, you know, that's like we talked about how they are all about their work ethic, you know, working hard. So they're definitely bigger risk takers than the previous generation. So, you know, we talked about how the previous generation, they didn't have much due to just the economic climate, with the Great Depression. So, you know, when something like that happens, you have kind of a distrust for the industries, the banking industries, the financial products that are offered. But, you know, baby boomers, they kind of were able to move past that and kind of forget that a little bit and really work to put money back to work. You know, there was a lot of growth that we talked about during that period, and that includes, of course, the stock market. So, you know, they definitely were able to make some big money. You know, you have movies like Wall Street, for like the original Wall Street, for anybody who was able to see that. You know, Gordon Gekko, like that was, I'm sure Gordon Gekko was a baby boomer, even though he's a fictional character. But, you know, a lot of them were able to make some really, really good money. So those people are safe. But, you know, also whenever you have real large positive growth in the stock market, you're going to get a widening of the wealth inequality. So the people at the bottom are going to get poorer, the rich are going to get richer. You know, the middle class expanded, but, you know, people who were in the middle, they weren't able to put away as much, trying to keep up with the big boys as far as making sure they were able to have a good time and party and play the way they wanted to. And, you know, I don't want to call them irresponsible, but, you know, it is what it is. Nobody wants to have a boring life. Everybody wants to have fun. Everybody wants to have a good time. But, you know, there's a balance there.
You know, it's very interesting that you say that because in regards to their feelings and the social attitudes that existed amongst the baby boomers, you wonder how could you come from, you know, how could you have parents essentially who were traditionalists, who were very, very cautious about their spending, to, you know, being a child growing up in that type of family system to then becoming an individual who would spend. So the baby boomers would be our parents, right? You know, so we grew up in a home with parents who were baby boomers.
They're professionals.
They were professionals. They were educated. More than the previous generation, because my grandparents didn't have any higher learning education at all. actually. So for my parents then to, not only get their bachelor's but also get a master's degree,
Both my parents are doctors.
it's strange, it's strange because their perseverance, it was just different, it's a different mindset.
Yeah, but I think if you were to talk to a lot of baby boomers now, one thing they'd probably say that they regretted was not budgeting as well perhaps as they should have. And also along with what we spoke about in the last video, I mean, in a work environment, they didn't want to just toe the company line there either. They didn't want to just, like, if the boss says something, they weren't going to not ask questions. They weren't going to question it. Look, if you want to do something, like, bring me in the office with you. Let's sit down and have a meeting. Let's get everybody's input. Don't just walk in and tell me what, I'm not just, the baby boomers, they weren't just the little worker bees that just sat in a cubicle and kept their head down and just did whatever was told to them. These were really revolutionary people. They wanted to change the world to make it the world that they wanted it to be, rather than what the rest of the world told them it had to be. And that's the kind of thing that comes once you know that you're the boss. Like when you're the U.S. and you become the U.S. and you're not third, fourth, fifth in the world. When you're number one, it changes the way you walk a little bit. You know what I mean? You want to impose your will a little bit. So you don't want to just be told what to do. You want to make sure that it makes sense. And again, this is no judgment. Look, money makes everybody crazy. So it's probably best none of us have too much of it, and maybe we should all learn to share a little bit better. But when it's coming in, it's hard to ever imagine a day that it's going to stop or it's going to slow down. When you're young and you got money, you think it's going to last forever.
Yeah.
You look at the professional athletes and how they spend and how they justify spending the money they spend. That's what happens. But prosperity brings with it, kind of bad decisions, because we get an invincibility complex, and this is just a human thing. It's not a baby boomers. It's not a generation thing so much as it is what was going on at the time that led them to be able to have so much, and how that affected their mindset towards the money.
Right, absolutely.
Alright, so that's it for this video, guys. The next one we got, what's the next one? Gen X. So some of y'all Gen Xers out there, I know you want to check that out. Excited to see what we got. So if you like this content on baby boomers, give it a thumbs up, like it, subscribe, just stick with us. We got some more coming down the pipe. Alright?
Alright.
We'll see y'all.